This channel exists due to my discovery of FPV through Hubsan, so it's only right that I check out their new H502S brushed quadcopter. To save you wasting any time pondering if this quadcopter is a good buy or not, I will tell you now it is brilliant. Just get it. I can't see of any reason to hesitate when considering this quadcopter, so that being said, let's find out why it is so good. Hubsan aren't often given much credit these days. In fact, they upset quite a few people with their promise of the Hubsan X4 Pro that took around 2 years to surface from their first announcement. I think we have all learned a lot from that, including Hubsan as well. You can't deny, though, that they have achieved some pretty amazing things. They were the first to offer a ready-to-fly FPV plane with the Hubsan Spyhawk. They were the first to offer an all-in-one FPV micro quad at an affordable price with the H502S, and now they have done it again, being the first company to offer a brushed quadcopter with GPS as well as FPV and HD recording features. So on paper, this thing looks pretty special, and at an affordable price of £130 on Banggood, which is mind-blowing. Let's take a look at what you get. We have the quadcopter, which isn't quite a micro quad, but it is smaller than a 200 size quad. Of course, it is using brushed motors, but they are using high quality shafts here, which come with rubber protectors fitted out of the box. You need to remove those to put the props on. There is a bearing on the prop shaft, which means we should have a smooth sounding quadcopter, as well as reduced tension on the brushed motors and less vibrations for the camera feed. The props are clearly marked A and B. I always found it interesting with Hubsan quadcopters. They have the motor direction opposite to the usual clockwise and counterclockwise configuration. The B props spin counterclockwise and the A props spin clockwise. It is marked A and B on the frame, making it easy to get them correct. The props will only go on the one way. They are keyed, so you have to line them up. On one side of the prop there is a line marked at the side of the A or B icon. This needs to line up with the flat edge of the prop shaft. You are then given some tiny screws that have thread lock already painted on them. You can use the included screwdriver to get those in tight. You are given 2 sets of blades in total. The package is pretty minimalistic, which I like. They have done away with any landing legs, and the quadcopter pretty much sits on its belly. There is enough clearance to take off in short grass, however. We have the wide-angle 720p camera up front, 4 LED lights, as well as the classic Hubsan visor up front. The body is very similar to the Hubsan H502S Plus, using a similar material, as well as having vents underneath to let out the heat coming off the battery and the VTX. Underneath, we also have a slot for the micro SD card. You have to provide your own in this kit. At the back, I'm happy to say that the quad is not using a proprietary battery, and we have a very slimline 2-cell 7.4 volt 610 milliamp LiPo that is using a standardized JST connector and balance plug, so I can use my hobby grade charger to charge it. The battery fits in really snug, so I can't see an option for adding a bigger battery, but hopefully we won't need one. Inside, a USB socket can be seen. However, as far as I can see, it does not function and is perhaps for updating the firmware. Also inside, I can see some pretty hefty RF shielding material. This is good news, as it was one of my main concerns with a small brushed micro quad fitted with GPS. There will be a hell of a lot of RF noise going on in this very confined space. This usually upsets GPS and compass units, which can cause a phenomenon known as the toilet bowl effect, where the quad drifts around in a slow circle. That shielding looks pretty hefty to me, so I will have to see how it copes in the flight test. You don't get bags of stuff in the box, which I kind of like. The only two things left are the USB charger, which plugs into the balance port of the battery, and the USB outlet to be used with a computer. And of course we have the transmitter as well. The box is really small in comparison to older models. However, I would have liked to have been able to put the quad back in the box with its props on, which you can't. Onto the transmitter, and on appearance it looks very similar to what we have been used to since the H107D came out. However, we have this new molded texture on the case which is more grippy. There is a couple of extra switches and of course the usual FPV screen up top. The transmitter is still being shipped to take 4 AA batteries. This has never been a good idea in my opinion, unless you are using rechargeable batteries which will still burn out as quick as matches. It is much better to replace the unit with a JST connector to connect a 2 or 3 cell LiPo. I will show you how to do that a bit later. On the side of the transmitter is a micro SD card reader and USB port. These are both non-functional on this model. This existed as a DVR on the old Hubsan H107D. The video record button triggered the DVR to record the live FPV feed, albeit at a very odd resolution. But now the record button is triggered to send a PWM signal to the quadcopter to start the video recording on board, rendering the built-in DVR useless. It's a shame that they could not retain the DVR feature, which is helpful for finding lost quadcopters. On the other side, we have an audio and video out socket to be used with Hubsan's FPV goggles. However, you can plug Fat Sharks into these if you have a jack-style adapter. Of course, you won't get any audio as the FPV signal does not transmit audio. You also won't get the on-screen display telemetry using goggles either, so it's best to fly using the stock transmitter with this one. The telemetry is overlaid onto the transmitter and not the FPV feed. Onto the transmitter controls, and as before we have the option to fly in mode 1, 2 and 3. To enter mode 1 we push both of the sticks to the top left and right corners and then turn the transmitter on. It will then say calibrate and you can move the sticks around a bit. Then press the down trim button and we are indefinitely in mode 1, which I really like. As with other quads you have to do this every time to get the correct mode. Mode 3 is both sticks to the right, and Mode 2 is both sticks to the left. There is no Mode 4, unfortunately. Once the TX has booted up, you will want to plug the quad in. There's no on and off switch, which I would like to have seen, but it's a minor issue, and in a way, it makes the quad more hobby grade. It will take a few seconds to boot up, as the quad and transmitter combination chooses a different 5.8 GHz frequency every time, and the transmitter has to bind to the aircraft as well as scan for its video frequency. Once it's done that, you will see the quad's video appear on the FPV monitor. The first thing I notice is that the image is not as smooth as the H107D or the H107D Plus model. This could be down to the extra processing power that is required in the quadcopter to cater for all of its features, or the extra processing power required by the transmitter to relay that telemetry data. Either way, it's not that much of a big deal because this quadcopter is fully GPS assisted like a DJI Phantom is. The Phantom has a fairly moderate delay on its FPV feed, but because we have the GPS to take care of the flying part, that's not a problem, and it's the same for the H502S. Before every flight, the quad will require its compass to be calibrated. The reason the quad needs a compass is that with GPS alone, the flight controller cannot tell which direction the quad is facing. It's like when you turn on your sat-nav in the car and you are not moving. Quite often the sat-nav will have you facing the wrong direction until you start moving. As quadcopters often hover, knowing the direction we are facing is important. So it uses an onboard compass to fill in that info. This has to be calibrated because metal objects can distort a compass reading. A compass calibration creates offsets for the distortions to give an accurate reading of where true north is. Different locations will have different distortions, so it is best to calibrate a compass as often as possible, which is why Hubsan have chosen to have it calibrate every time for safety, and I do this with all my GPS assisted quads as well. Calibration is easy. It's best to do it outside and away from any metal objects such as cars or computers. Calibration 1 will flash on the screen, and you just have to rotate the quadcopter on the horizontal axis until it says Calibration 2. I found that Calibration 1 can take up to 1 minute before it changes to Calibration 2, so be patient and it will work. And then rotate the quadcopter on the vertical axis until Calibration 2 disappears off the screen and you can move on to the next step. Of course, we have spring-loaded sticks here, so the quad features full altitude hold as well. I would really love Hubsan to add hobby-grade gimbals to this transmitter. It is its only downfall in my opinion, but that would no doubt bump the price up. And because the quad will basically fly itself, it won't be an issue at all. Onto the switches, and the top left switch turns on GPS hold, which is in the up position, and in the down position it is in altitude hold mode only. With the stock settings, the quad won't let you take off until you have at least 6 satellites, even in altitude hold mode. We can change that in the settings, and I will show you how to do that in a bit. The switches on and off position are reversed to what you would usually expect, with up being on and down being off, but the transmitter does tell you what mode you are in on the screen, which is helpful. The other switch is the return to home function. Again, the down position is off. If return to home is selected from the get-go, the quad will not arm, so make sure it is left in the down position for takeoff. We have 2 buttons underneath those switches. The left one is for taking a photo and the right one is to start and stop video recording. Both of these actions will be displayed on the screen. When video recording is selected, you do not get a further frame rate drop, which is good. There's no flip function on this quadcopter, however we have a couple of more functions which are activated by pressing in the control sticks, which act as extra buttons. These features change function depending on which mode you have set the transmitter to. I have set mine to mode 1, so pressing down on the throttle stick sends the quadcopter into headless mode, which, as you may know, I'm never a fan of, so I will not be displaying that feature. I believe as a pilot, you should always correct for the orientation of the quadcopter yourself. And the other stick is follow me mode. Yes, believe it or not, this transmitter has its own GPS module inside of it, and the quad will lock onto the transmitter and follow the pilot. Pretty amazing features for such a low price point. That is, if they all work, of course. That brings me neatly on to the on-screen display. These 2 sets of numbers at the bottom are the GPS coordinates of the quadcopter, but also the transmitter. The number next to that is the number of satellites that each device is picking up. As mentioned, the manual recommends at least 6 satellites before it will allow you to fly. We also have other information such as the transmitter's battery monitor and also the quadcopter's battery voltage. It flashes red at around 7 volts, however it will continue flying until as little as 6.4 volts. There is also the quad's height in meters, as well as its speed and the distance from the pilot. There is a roll and pitch sensor, which is nice, however I can't see myself using that personally. We also have the quad's heading in degrees as well, which is everything you would expect from a quadcopter 10 times the price of this one. A good thing about the GPS coordinates is that if the quad gets lost and the battery runs out, if you keep the transmitter switched on, it will record its last known position in the figures. So you can take a snapshot of the FPV screen with your phone and then run to your computer to find out where the quadcopter is using those coordinates. As mentioned earlier, you can't take the quad off in any mode unless you have 6 GPS satellites. But what if you want to fly inside? Well, we can turn that feature off. You just need to lower the throttle and then press in the opposite stick until a menu pops up. You can then scroll down using the elevator stick to the setting that says Fly when no GPS and change that option to Yes by pressing on the elevator stick, scrolling down again using the rudder to change the selection. It will then let you arm the quad in altitude hold mode. You can change all sorts of other settings in this menu, such as the 5.8 GHz frequency, and the rates if you wish to dial them down, as well as any axis reversal if you need to, but from stock this should be set correctly anyway. You can use the transmitter as a standalone FPV monitor, which is the same as all the other Hubsan models, by holding down the video record button and then powering on the transmitter. You are then given the RSSI value of the video feed, which can be helpful for hobbyists. And of course, you can go into the menu and change the 5.8 GHz frequency to whatever you desire, from 5735 MHz to 5840 MHz. Of course, as we no longer have the system initialized bind screen like the H107D model, you don't really need to press the video record button while powering on the transmitter to take advantage of using the unit as a standalone FPV screen. You can just go into the menu as normal and change the 5.8 GHz frequency to anything you desire, however you will be missing that RSSI info. Another thing I did notice is that if you power on the transmitter pressing in the photo button, we get the old system initialize screen, and we are now able to use the old Hubsan X4 models with this transmitter. I don't see much use for this, as the original Hubsan models do not have the altitude hold feature, meaning that the spring-loaded sticks will cause erratic behavior to the throttle on the older models. However, it's good to have the different protocol options. Lastly, to arm the quad, you hold the sticks both to the bottom and to the side, and the props will start spinning. You have to do the same to disarm, which I can confirm works effectively. That's all of the controls, so let's take this thing apart and add a LiPo battery to the transmitter. You need to undo the 4 screws that keep the transmitter together using a posi driver. I then forced 2 guitar picks into the side of the battery module, which dislodges the 2 clips keeping the unit in place. The entire battery module will then lift out easily. You can desolder the module from its power wires in case you ever want to add it back. You can solder a JST connector to the plus and minus pins. I got these JST connectors from Banggood.com. You can use a 2 to 3S battery to power the TX, and now we have plenty of room for a big battery as well. Then tape up the wires so that they do not touch each other or any of the other circuitry. While the transmitter is apart, you can see that GPS module at the bottom corner for the follow me function. At the top we have the usual bi-quad antenna for the 5.8 GHz FPV receiver. This is a long-range directional antenna, which means the transmitter will have to be pointed at the aircraft to get the best video signal. You can modify this to add a cloverleaf antenna, however you would also need to do the same on the quadcopter to benefit from it. I'm not going to modify the transmitter any further for this video, but in my opinion the battery mod is a must. At the top there is also a 2.4 GHz antenna which clips onto the transmitter chip. It would be really easy to modify it if we have any range issues. Let's put the transmitter back together and go and take it for a test flight. The amount of stuff that you get in this package for this price is pretty overwhelming. It's not a pilot's quad for sure. It serves a function as an aerial photography quad. The flying is all taken care of with the GPS and compass. It flies superb. The GPS hole is completely locked in, even in very windy conditions. There's no toilet bowl effect. They have completely nailed it with this quad. It is amazing. The camera footage is really good too. It's only 720p, but it seems sharper than the H107D Plus. They have definitely ironed out those issues with this model. I'm finding that the colour balance has a slight yellow tint to the whites, but it's not that bad. It records at 30 frames per second. It's kind of hard for me to recommend the Plus model now. This one is around about the same price and offers so many more features. The H107D Plus was never good indoors. Altitude hold in general is hard to crack indoors, so I definitely recommend this one over the H107D Plus. As for the range, it is okay. It's definitely better than the Plus model. However, I start to lose video at about 100 meters, and I know that it's at 100 meters because the transmitter tells me how far away the quad is when the video cuts out. The manual states that it can go for about 200 meters, and of course, it does have that return to home function, so you can definitely push its range for sure. But with this one, at 120 meters, the control starts to become sketchy and delayed, and I get a random return to home message that comes in intermittently on the on-screen display. The video does start to cut out at 100 meters, however, it does remain viewable until the return to home cuts in. It climbs to about 60 feet before returning home, and it does come home rather sharpish. The follow me feature really surprised me. It works so well. Just press the elevator stick in and the quad locks into the transmitter. It does not alter its yaw, so make sure that you are facing yourself when you engage it, but I can't knock it at all. The altitude hold does work about the same as the H107D Plus, which is just fine for outside. I don't think you will be flying this one inside anyway, especially with all of those GPS features. I can't wait to try this on a calm day, but those are few and far between at the moment here. I touched on the return to home function earlier, but again it works flawlessly. The quad even orientates itself back to the pilot as it comes home. It lands in exactly the same place as it took off from without any effort, which is something that my APM-equipped quad struggled to do with such accuracy. It's a very exciting time for the hobby for sure. The flight time is about 13 minutes, which is impressive from such a small battery and the amount of features that the quad is packing. As mentioned earlier, the battery monitor on the TX turns to red at about 7 volts. However, the quad will continue flying for quite some time after that, so don't pay too much attention to it. At about 6.4 volts, the aircraft performed a auto land. It doesn't return to home, it just lands at its GPS hold point, so make sure you give yourself enough voltage to fly home at least. It doesn't have bags of power, but it is enough for aerial photography, as well as battling an 18-mile-an-hour wind, which is what I am facing today. It is much quieter than your average brushed quadcopter as well, which I predicted due to those high-quality bearings fitted to the prop shaft. When the quad is in the return to home mode, you have no control of the aircraft whatsoever, so to regain control, you have to switch off the return to home mode function. The rate of ascent and descent seems to be limited, but it is the perfect amount to achieve a smooth transition. I found that when you engage the return to home or the battery got too low and it auto-landed, the props do not seem to stop. You still have to disarm the quad the same way that you arm it by pushing both of the sticks out and to the bottom, left and right. This is a minor gripe, however I would have liked to have seen the props auto-stop as soon as the quad realizes that it is not descending anymore. To conclude, this quad has a lot of positive points, and if you are into this hobby, then you just have to get one. It is very cheap. It has GPS features similar to a DJI Phantom, and they work flawlessly too. The follow me mode is brilliant, the altitude hold works, you can change to modes 1, 2 and 3, the flight time is 13 minutes, which is very respectful for its size. As well as having FPV, it records the footage at 720p. There is no proprietary battery, so it can charge quickly with a hobby-grade charger. You are given full telemetry including height, speed, battery levels, satellite numbers, and GPS position. And the range is better than the previous brush models too. There is just a couple of negatives really to think about. The FPV transmitter requires modification to use a LiPo battery, otherwise your FPV screen won't last long. There is some inconsistency with the range as well. It is stated as being 200 meters, however I was getting video and control dropouts at 100 meters plus. This next one is being really picky, but the quad doesn't pack into the box with the props added. I know it's a small thing, but it takes time to remove the props and pack everything back into the box. And, as mentioned, the props don't stop once the quad has landed. You have to manually disarm it. So there you go, that is my review of the Hubsan 502S. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much to Banggood for sending this sample in for review. I always buy my stuff from them. Their customer service is just great. I will put a link in the description if you wish to buy it. I recommend that you do. I do not have much bad to say about this quad. You can follow me on Instagram at AndyRC_channel for more content. As always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.